Good afternoon, and I must thank everybody for being here. It is my pleasure, it is my privilege to be here and to have been invited by the Foundation for Indian Art and Education Goa and Directorate of Art and Culture, Government of Goa, and to have this opportunity to speak in front of you is also to create an occasion to share certain experiences about one of my particular interests which I have been pursuing over last more than 8-9 years, that is art appreciation or conducting art appreciation sessions with children, to be very specific. Now, this particular presentation, before we move on to images, yes, I have several images to share with you, to show you, and also demonstrate how I usually go about this kind of sessions with children, what are the outcomes, and what are the kinds of experiments that I have been experiencing over the years. Now, briefly, this presentation, as the title itself suggests, is certainly on art appreciation, and more specifically on some of the findings that emerged from my ongoing study of art appreciation vis-a-vis school children. And over a period of last 7 years, or more than that, 8 years, 9 years, I have engaged myself with this subject, making a lot of field studies, actual surveys, real encounters with children across various age groups and social backgrounds, and also trying to, let us say, discover, seek, and figure out some kind of methodology. Not a very fixed structure per se, but some kind of methodology, some kind of way to go about things. And every time I got the same kind of experience that no, you can't have a very fixed model. You cannot have a very fixed structure. Depending on the various age groups, depending on the social and cultural backgrounds the children come from, depending on the kind of images or visuals you're showing to them, depending on the response or the patterns of responses emerging from the children, you need to keep your methodology changing. You need to keep playing with your own methodology, your own structure, and hence you cannot have a very fixed model. This is one very, very important finding, one very important discovery that I have made for myself. And as a result, this art appreciation project on my part remains to be very experimental. Essentially, it has to be very experimental. So you never know. I don't call myself a teacher. You can't teach art appreciation, really speaking. You facilitate. You create an environment. You create a situation where you kind of encourage, stimulate, provoke the children to respond to certain works of art, to let them speak out, let them speak their mind, let them tell you what they feel, how they feel, and let them also generate meaning. This is also one very important part of my work, of my project. I want the children to make a sense out of what they are looking at, A. B. I also want them to generate meaning, to come up with certain meanings of art, whatever they feel. It can be a narrative meaning, it can be a story, it can be a thematic understanding, it can be a conceptual kind of understanding about a certain work of art. But let them say, let them make meaning, let them make their own world of meanings. And I'm not going to say whether it is right or wrong. I will discuss their meanings with them. I will listen to them. But certainly I'm not going to say that this is right, this is wrong. And certainly I'm not going to encourage them to say, I like this work or I don't like this work. No value judgment, please. This is what I try to kind of instill in them right at the outset. We are here not to say this is good, this is bad, but we are here to engage ourselves, get excited. Now, keeping these aspects in my mind, usually I begin the sessions, and one particular project that I have been doing with children, and given the time today, I won't be able to really talk about the various projects that I have engaged myself with, but one particular project definitely would be very interesting for you. It's about the paintings of one person, one very famous, very eminent person who is very well known, not as a painter really, more than a painter. He is very well known as a poet, as a philosopher, of course as a literary person. First literary person to win the Nobel Award in 1913, Rabindranath Tagore. So he has done a lot of paintings at the last fag end of his life. In the last 20 years of his life, he has come up with more than 2,000 paintings. But really not many of us are aware of the fact that he painted, and even when we are aware of the fact, we do not really know about the value of those paintings, I mean the aesthetic values. Now I thought, okay, Rabindranath is well-known person, a very well-known figure, but the children may not know much about his paintings. And also Rabindranath's paintings they do not offer very specific, very fixed, very clear meanings as to what they are, what they represent. So I thought this is a very interesting ground to play on. So I used, quote-unquote, Rabindranath Tagore for the project. And this is one particular project that I'm going to talk about, I'm going to share with you. Now, because as you will see, I have brought myself here on this PowerPoint presentation some selected examples of Rabindranath's paintings, which I usually show to the children, because most of his paintings, like these ones, are, since the meanings are non-specific, so they are open to interpretations. So children go gaga over it. They want to make their own stories, they want to make their own meanings. And as they keep doing that, they get more and more engaged with the visual language of the paintings. And that becomes a wonderful entry point. So when you replace Rabindranath's paintings with other paintings, they are already tuned. So the important part is to tune them, to make them feel that, okay, they are not just receivers of a certain idea or a visual idea. They are also in a position to make meanings, to make their own interpretations, which we usually do not allow children to do. Usually we get the meanings and we want them to reach that or preconditioned meanings. So it is basically also to decondition their mind and to let them play with the meanings of various artworks. So that apart, as a facilitator, as somebody who loves to work with children vis-a-vis art appreciation, my position is also very interesting in a sense that experimental to begin with, definitely it is very experimental, and hence I'm always kind of at a very anxious position because I don't know what is going to be my next step. Every stage there is something new, something unpredictable coming up. So I need to then and there decide what will be my next step, what thing that I'm showing to the children, how will I tackle this particular kid who is refusing to even look at a particular painting, how do I tackle that child who is simply going for extremist kind of value judgments. So as a person who is facilitating, it is for me every moment is a very anxious moment. Thirdly, it is also true that the moment I look at myself as not somebody who is teaching, quote unquote, art appreciation, but somebody who is participating in a collective viewing. I'm part of that collecting, viewing, whatever, experience, then I also become a co-learner. I'm not a teacher, I'm a learner. Now what do I learn from children? I learn various things which I might be missing out on in different kinds of paintings, sculptures, and various works of art. So in a way, if we are able to make the children feel empowered with some kind of ability to look at paintings, look at works of art, certain kind of ability to be in a position that, okay, they can say, they become almost like art critics. So there is an ample opportunity for us, for the grown-ups, to learn from them. So this is something that I discovered over the years, that I can learn a lot from these sessions. Then I need to make my own discretion, my own decisions about how much to take, how much not to take. That is another issue. But definitely there is a lot to learn from children, because as we are prone, as art teachers, we are usually prone to make these children a kind of skillful in terms of making. We forget that they should also become quite skilled and well equipped in terms of looking. So I'm making a kind of distinction. It's not a theoretical distinction, it is a very practical distinction, that usually in most of the schools, in most of, not only the main kind of schools, I'm talking also about weekend schools, small little schools that we have in our neighborhoods, everywhere we encourage children to make, to create. I'm talking about hands-on practice, which is absolutely fine, and it should be like that. But at the same time, usually, at least in our country, we don't have the initiative. Generally speaking, there are exceptions. Generally speaking, we don't take the initiatives of making the children see, look. So I'm focusing on looking, that looking part. Though in my sessions, sometimes I do have to do sometimes hands-on things, just to, if the children get very, very bored looking at the same images over 30 minutes, 20 minutes, to kind of to give them a break. Okay, fine, let us do something. Then I again get back to looking. But I have felt for many, many years that we should not take the ability to look for granted, because this is also something that we need to inculcate. We need to practice. We need to instill certain kind of skill. We need to teach them certain kind of skill of looking. And once we begin to do that, the children really become very powerful viewers, very powerful onlookers. And hence, we can rest assured that we are creating a very powerful future viewership. So because viewership or viewing is something that we need to practice, and we do practice all the time. Then so why do we deprive children from this very, very interesting practice? Now elsewhere, in most of the American museums, European museums, I have seen that children are invited regularly to inculcate this, just the act of looking and seeing. So before we come to Rabindranath, I would also like to say that, I have had, and I'm sure many of you will be also having similar kind of experience, where when we encounter children in a certain kind of atmosphere, where somebody is doing art or some kind of art making atmosphere, we definitely learn a lot from them. For example, right now I'm remembering a very simple, it's a very simple anecdote that at the very early stage of my career, when I was teaching art to children in some weekend art class in Kolkata, I noticed there was a boy who was doing a kind of cityscape, and obviously he came up with the usual kind of stuffs like tall buildings and street and cars, and also sun, but not one sun, quite a few suns. So I was slightly confused. Why did he have to do so many suns? So the point is that despite all my experience of studying art history and all that, I was not able to figure out. Look at my situation, I was like clueless. So I felt extremely kind of weak at not being able to interpret the fact that he had drawn more than one, at least several suns. So when I asked him, we all know there is one sun, so why there are so many suns? He simply said, because it's too hot. The simple answer, that in order to express this very high temperature and too much of, because we were having this class in the height of the summer, sometimes in late May or June. So then I realized that, oh my God, I need to unlearn many of these things that I have learned. I need to first decondition myself. I'm so preconditioned that this very simple logic escaped my mind. Similarly, there was another boy who was doing, I think it was during that famous Vishwakarma Puja in September, so we have these kite flying festivals. So he did a painting, a small little painting on kite flying, and then suddenly I noticed on top of one of the flying kites, he has drawn himself. Then again, my typical grown-up rational logic kind of compelled me to tell him, look, when you fly the kite, you stand on the ground and the kite is in the sky, you are not on the sky or on the kite. Then he said, no, I am. I said, how come? Because when I fly the kite, usually my mind also flies along with the kite. So that is not me, that's my mind. And where are you? Outside the frame. So there's a lot is left to imagination. There's a lot is left to kind of interpret, which as grown-ups we fail to do. Hence we have to ask. So then I realized there's a lot to learn from them. I have learned a lot from my grown-up teachers. Now it's time that I learn from my young teachers. So that is the point, a very, very important moment in my life that I realized that I should be doing more and more this looking sessions along with the children, not only about their work, about let me show maybe a painting by Van Gogh, maybe a painting by Picasso, maybe an Ajanta painting or whatever, anything traditional, modern, Indian based, and let me see now, how do they respond? And it is at that point of time, quite fortunately, quite coincidentally, I also came across small little books, of course not published from India, published from elsewhere, mostly America, or even, one or two English books from England, where specifically these books are on this issue, that how to talk to children about art. So that is something that I never knew but I wanted to do. But you see, the way we are taught art, particularly art history or art criticism, it is taken for granted that we will always be talking to grown-ups. So when it has happened many times, often it has happened that a child is asking me, a young boy is asking me, what is this, what is that painting, what is the meaning? Do I know the meanings of that particular painting, maybe by Picasso, by heart? I know everything about it. Still, I don't know how to communicate that information to that young person. I have not been taught. So I need to do some self-teaching. So I have to be self-taught on that. And thanks to one of my teachers in Shantiniketan, he in fact suggested that if you're interested in this subject, if you really want to write on art for children, if you really want to talk on art to children, then it is imperative to do some field work. Really get some children, talk to them, show works of art to them, and see how do they respond. Otherwise, they'll be never able to know how to articulate. So for me, it has always been a great challenge that how do I articulate things about art to children. Because I can't articulate the way I do usually with grown-ups. And if I dilute, it is also not fair. I should not dilute. I should not make it, in the name of making it very simple, I should not make it so simple that it doesn't care. Because you see, children are very, very clever. They can make out, you're not doing the right thing, you're not being fair. So I don't want to be unfair with them. So I started these field books, these various projects. And one of them is, of course, with Tagore's paintings. Now, before I do that, just a few more anecdotes as warm-up session. For instance, this is something that I noticed in a village next to Shantiniketan while cycling down in one fine morning in winter, that a group of children making this, and one particular boy was very fast and quickly making such figures, and I was almost stunned to see that. Why? It's a very simple kind of clay figure which he was making and keeping them aside just to get them sunburnt, and later on he might be using it, taking them back home, whatever. You know, why I was surprised to see that, not that this small little, because you see, for the village children, this is very normal. Their mothers make, they also make, for them it's a game. Yeah, very important is that making art for our children often is not a game, it's like another mathematics class or another history class. But for the village children, I have always seen that making art is a game. Like they would play football, they would play something else, they would climb up the trees or swim in their pond. Similarly, with that same kind of temperament, they would also be maybe doing some painting on the wall, creating these clay stuffs very, very casually. So that is also something that's missing with our children, but in rural areas you will find them very, very spontaneous with clay and this thing. But yes, coming back to my perception, you see, where I get so embarrassed, it's very important to where grown-ups fail. So I should give my example as one of the most failure art historians. So I thought I found a strange similarity between this and many of these Indus Valley civilization clay figurines that we find, which belong to some 4,500 years old era. And definitely the similarity is striking. So I thought maybe it's the same kind of cultural consciousness, subconscious stream flowing underneath, etc. There are all these theories, Carl Jung and all that. So I was using these theories in my mind, and I wanted that young boy to establish, to corroborate, to support my theory, and hence I asked him that, what is this? He was completely uninterested. He kind of, he wanted me to simply look and go away. So I insisted that please tell me what is that you have made. Then he said, can't you see? He said, yeah, it looks like maybe an icon which you would worship. You see, I was very much preconditioned with these images that I have seen in my art history classes of 5,000 years old, 4,500 years old images. So I was stuck to that idea. So I wanted him to say that yes, this is also a kind of mother goddess or some kind of small little, icons which we worship in our villages, and that would have satisfied my art historical frame of thinking. Now instead, he said, well, because I was continuously trying to connect this 4,500 years old clay figurine with this 5-6 years old clay figure, and I was trying to see this connection, this art historical connection. Because there is something we call ageless type of art, and this theory was proposed by one of the great art historians of all time, Stella Crumrish. So I was using her theory as well. Then this boy said, no, this is not God, goddess, aisa kuch nahi hai. So I asked him, so what is this? He said, Akshay Kumar. Khiladi dekha hai, khiladi? I said, what? Khiladi, okay, film. Oh my God, he's talking about Bollywood films, Akshay Kumar. I was quite disappointed, sad. Then he said, what is missing is the topi. I'll make the topi for you. In fact, he did. I don't have that photograph. He did the topi for you, and he said, now it looks like a perfect Akshay Kumar. Because you see, we have to feel that though the form more or less looks very similar, but the idea is different, and the idea is generating not itself from the form itself, but from what he expects it to be. So it's partly mental and partly physical. So we often miss out that mental aspect, what he's imagining. Because art can't, any piece of art cannot hold everything physically in its body. It is partly there in the physical existent entity, and it is there also in the imagination of the viewer, imagination of the artist, imagination of the culture. So I thought, okay, fine, that's a wonderful experience, very good lesson for me. So, that is one story, and I had already told you a few of those challenging experiences that I had with children when they did those several suns and saw a boy put himself on the flying kite. Now, yes, with the paintings of Tagore, what happens that on many occasions, I do not tell the children that these are by Rabindranath Tagore, particularly the Bengali children, since they're very familiar with Rabindranath Tagore, though they may not be doing many of them. It's also a very interesting fact. This is absolutely from my personal experience. I'm not imagining that I have found, despite the fact that Rabindranath Tagore is like an icon for Bengali culture, many children, even many grown-ups, do not know that he was also a painter. That aspect of Tagore, it's a very important aspect, that he was a painter. He did not do these paintings casually. He started painting at the age of 16, right? He died at the age of 80 in 1941. In these last 20 years of his life, he came up with more than 2,000 proper paintings. Besides the fact that at that point of time he was also traveling, during that time he was also traveling, he was also writing other things, he was composing songs, he was managing his institution, Vishwabharati, he was doing so many things. So this is very interesting. This also goes to say that maybe by and large, we are not a very visual culture. We miss out the fact that Tagore was also a painter. So that definitely, so we don't blame the children. The children, many of the children would not also know that they are by Tagore, these paintings, but still, I also keep quiet. I let them know, mostly at the end of the section. Now what happens, that usually, at least this happens with Tagore, that there's a lot of commotion in the beginning. The children, they would not, they're not ready to accept these kind of things as works of art. They would say, what is this? In Bengali, they would often use the term chhalabada, akibuki. This means, these terms mean this meaningless scribbles and scratches. Meaningless. These are meaningless stuff that you're showing. No, we don't accept. So there's a serious rejection at the beginning. So they would reject these works. And I also do not interfere with their rejection. In fact, I pretend that I'm with them. I also say, yeah, these are quite meaningless, pointless things that he has been making. Then I slowly show the next one. They get a little, they get a shock. So from rejection, there begins a certain kind of recognition. You see, it's the same kind of works, because Rabindranath Tagore himself started painting from this process of scribbling, doodling, overwriting his manuscripts, erasing, and then he discovered that through this process, he is coming up with some very fascinating, interesting forms and shapes. So even if you follow the procedure that Rabindranath himself had followed, there was a kind of rejection in the beginning. He was basically rejecting his manuscripts, mistakes in his manuscripts, and in the process of rejecting them, overwriting on them, doing some scribblings on them, he was coming up with certain patterns, some kind of vague visual forms. And this is the same procedure that mentally, at least, these children were following. So initially they were also rejecting, and from rejection they were arriving at certain amount of recognition. They were not recognizing them as great works of art, but they were able to recognize, okay, now we can vaguely see the contour line of a face or maybe some kind of form. And then you show something like this, then the children start laughing. Okay, that also could be a process. Then I remember in one of the sessions, not one, many children told me that we also do all these scribblings and doodlings on our own exercise books, the pages, but nobody told us that that process can also take us to, this kind of forms and paintings, this kind of very interesting images. Why, for us, we have to do our paintings and drawings, everything afresh on a white piece of paper. So, okay, so this process could be a very interesting, very provocative entry point for many children who otherwise would not feel interested in art. Because once again, we take it for granted that everybody, every kid would be interested in doing art. And we all know it is not true. Even I myself, though now I'm teaching art history and all that, I'm interested in art, talking about art. At one point, I was also not very much interested in doing art. I felt, and again another art class. I would rather go out and play. It's also because the format of art making has become so monotonous, so same, so repetitive. But the moment, so what happened at this point of time, I also realized when they themselves, you see, this is what I was learning from them. So they gave me a wonderful clue. Okay, in their art class also, instead of providing them with fresh white papers, why don't I ask them to use their own discarded pages from their previous year's exercise books, practice books, and do some paintings on that. So they will feel, okay, they're doing something like Rabindranath, they'll also feel excited, and in the process they will also learn a very, very important idea that is being addressed all over the world right now, that is the process of recycling. Instead of always using fresh new page, why don't we reuse an old and discarded page also? And everything becomes a part of a game, a fun, a play. So not only Rabindranath became a very interesting lesson for these children, but the way they responded also turned out to be a very interesting lesson for me as an art teacher. And I applied this also when I was doing some hands-on works with the children. So it becomes like, in fact, why won't a young kid really like this kind of scribblings? Because you see, for very young kids who are in class 3, 4, 5, 6, for them, all these scribblings and doodles by Rabindranath, they are not pointless, they're quite meaningful because they themselves have done this, maybe just the year before. They're quite good at doing this. Though we do not let them soil the walls, very well distempered walls. We don't really allow them to kind of soil their shirts and the bed sheets and tablecloths and their own hands. But they love to do that, and it is there that they feel themselves connected with Tagore's paintings. But with slightly grown-up kids, they kind of, some of them were able to conceptualize this whole procedure. Okay, it is not necessary that you have to start drawing a painting afresh. You can begin with a certain kind of uncertain process, an uncertain procedure of sketching, scribbling, doodling, and thereby it is possible to arrive at a very interesting form. So I learned from them, and I went back to Tagore again, and I began showing something else. Now these kind of forms or paintings by Tagore are also interesting because these paintings lend themselves to various meanings. Not one or two, but various meanings. And there are not one or two, but there are many such paintings by Tagore. So what happens that when we ask these children, what do you think about these paintings? What are the meanings what sense do you make out of these paintings? So they keep telling me, okay, they look like pottery, they look like some kind of crockery, they look like this, they look like that. I will go on with this particular idea. Similarly, interestingly, under some of the, we can put up these lights, please, so that yellow lights. Then you can see the caption also. Now, underneath some of the images, you will find a caption. Now, please remember that these captions are not titles because Rabindranath hardly gave any title to any of his paintings, barring one or two. These are the captions offered by the children. So I'm using them like that. So when I showed the painting, this particular painting, to many children on various occasions, in different sessions, usually they all came up with, it looks like a bird, it looks like this. Then somebody said in one particular session, a group of children said, it looks like a lamp, it looks like a lamp, like a diya. Then somebody said, no, it looks like a man. Then a third group said, then it is probably a lamp man. No, okay. Now the previous one, in case of the previous one also, there were contradictory interpretations of these paintings, but I have always discovered at least one or two children in the class who were ready to accept the contradictions. Now this is very interesting because which I never told them, at least not during the sessions. Later on, when I went back to them, sometimes I shared this idea with them that it's not an idea, it's an information that Rabindranath himself was actually looking at these forms as a combination of various forms. He himself wanted the viewers to find apparently contradictory forms or different forms within one single visual form. This is what he was exploring in his paintings. And without letting these children know any of these ideas, usually the children were quite spontaneous to understand this temperament of Rabindranath Tagore. So they gave this name, the Lamp Man. Fine. Now, when we were talking about these works, again, as you can see, children usually love these paintings because these forms, once again, do not have any fixed identity. These forms have multiple identities, hence multiple meanings. And as a result, almost if it is a group of 30 children, there will be 30 different interpretations, 30 different meanings, and finally it will end up with a lot of fighting. So I also need to kind of manage that. I don't fight over the meanings. All of you, everybody is correct. Then somebody would say, how can it be? There should be one correct answer because that is how they are conditioned with. Everything has a one correct answer. So either you score on that or you can't. Now then slowly I need to I have to tell them, look, these are the kind of paintings where you cannot have one single meaning. These are the kind of paintings where you have to be very, very happy with the fact that they have many meanings, many forms, many identities. What is wrong with that? Then I remember in one of these sessions, one particular girl came up with, no, it is true that one day when I saw my friend, she was standing beside a tree after the school. Probably she was waiting for her friend so that they would go back to home together because they live in the same locality. The way she was standing, I still remember that she looked like a tree, but she was not a tree. She was my friend, but she looked like a tree. So it is possible that in one form you can have two things coming up. Look, this is a girl who was, I think, in class 7 at that time. Yes, she was in the 7th standard. She was coming up with this idea, this understanding, which we as grown-up art historians struggles a lot. We go through 10 or 15 books in order to arrive at this idea. But they are coming up with this idea so spontaneously, so naturally. That is why it is so important to look at art through the eyes of children. Now, another thing, let me tell you that several times Tagore himself was asked, what is that you're trying to capture in your art? What exactly you are trying to capture, what you're trying to communicate? Because your figures look very strange, whether it's a human figure or animal figures, they look very awkward, they look so unfamiliar, they look outlandish. So what exactly you're trying to say? In many cases, Rabindranath himself had replied that the form can be anything, I don't care. But what I want to capture is the rhythm. Now, I really never told these things to the children with whom I worked so far. But when we were discussing with them on something like this, not one, Rabindranath had done this quite a few paintings similar to this one. Obviously, the first few minutes there will be very direct and very one-to-one kind of interpretation. It looks like a dancer, she's dancing, blah blah blah. But then, in most of the cases I've seen, at least one or two children will come up with this idea that, yeah, maybe she's a dancer, probably she is, looks like that it's the figure of a dancer, but what Rabindranath here is trying to say or do is not basically, it's not, this picture is not about the dancer, it's about, then what? Then she came up with this answer about rhythm. So she is able to respond to this very abstract quality of a painting, which is usually very difficult for us, even grown-ups, to kind of respond to. We take a lot of time, and they are doing it very spontaneously. Again, something wonderful to learn from them. Now, then, when I showed this one, okay, that was a dancer, and it's about the rhythm. Now, what is this? And then somebody said, look, I think Rabindranath couldn't draw the fingers and the hands properly, like very awkward. Then somebody said, no, they're not fingers, they're like flames. Then somebody said, look at the feet. It's very awkward. Probably he didn't know anatomical drawing and all that. So they went on talking amongst themselves only, discussing, fighting, arguing, and usually I let them do that. Usually I try not to interfere, not to intervene, so that I don't want my ideas to get imposed on them. I simply watch, I observe, and often I also provoke. Yes, I take part, I become a part of that group or this group. So usually they don't have any faith in me, because I keep changing my positions all the time in order to make all the children happy that I'm with them. So I become nobody. Then suddenly somebody comes up with this response that, look, I know what it is. It is not a human figure. It's basically a flame, and when a flame starts dancing, it looks like a human figure, but it is actually about dancing flames. I don't know what exactly Rabindranath had thought when he made this painting, because often we don't have any document to cross-check that. But it's a very interesting interpretation, and it's a very interesting way to look at painting. Instead of going for a very singular meaning or a singular interpretation, it's basically opening up not only for the girl who came up with this interpretation, but also for the rest of the children. And I once again repeat that it is whatever we call art appreciation, art looking sessions, whatever we call, primarily it is about collective viewing. So because what you miss out, your friend may help you out. So what you thought this particular painting would be this or that, somebody else comes up with a different interpretation, and you get a kind of charge. Okay, they have ego problems. They will not really confess that this particular child was actually influenced by the interpretation of another child. But it happens. It happens in collective viewing. And it's not only about collective viewing, it is about collectively talking about what they are viewing. So all these things make the sessions very interesting. For instance, when I showed this painting, even before looking at the word properly, somebody said it's a mountain, somebody said it's an old man. Then I'm talking about a different session, not the same session, that they found out the logic of looking at Rabindranath painting. Absolutely a different group of people, children. And then somebody said, so okay, it could be mountain, it could be man, then let us say that it's a mountain man. Let us have both. And then they begin to actually see both. And they are perhaps not wrong, because when I go back to what Rabindranath himself had said about his paintings, Rabindranath himself keeps telling us that I do not go for one singular form. I go for a kind of form where various forms can have their existence simultaneously at the same time. I mean, it's a very strange thing for him to do, because at that point of time, in modern Indian art, nobody was painting the way he was painting. Everybody had more or less a very clear agenda. For Rabindranath also had an agenda, but it was a very different. It was a non-narrative agenda, very non-specific agenda. And children can respond to his philosophy of painting very fast, without knowing the history, without knowing the context, simply by looking at these paintings. For that matter, this kind of works as well. Here I will come I would like to share something else also with you. That when I was showing these, when Rabindranath had a huge group of paintings with this kind of very strange figures. Now he himself had said these are not really figures; these are constructions of very strange figures and maybe fantasy figures, maybe mythological figures. So when I show these paintings, what happens usually that children, particularly urban children, would generally come up with this response that okay, they look like characters from Jurassic Park. This is usually them. They feel like okay, they look like maybe dinosaur, pterodactyl, something like that, coming from that era. Okay, fine. But when I show the same kind of paintings to rural children who may not have seen Jurassic Park, who are in most cases, because I've been to very, very interior tribal villages where there's no opportunity for them to really know about what Jurassic Park is. In that on the case, I've seen that these rural children, they will have entirely a different way of looking at these paintings, understanding these paintings, since they do not have that Jurassic Park as a part of their framework, as a part of their conception. So they would say, I think I have seen this animal. Rather than kind of categorizing them as Jurassic Park, because for them Jurassic Park doesn't exist. They have to be a part of their life. Where did you see this animal? They said, nay, at night, in moonlit night, when these huge trees start shaking because of the wind, I think I have seen. So they use their imagination and they begin to see things which they have never actually seen in their life. So it is a different engagement. For the urban children, it is a different kind of engagement. And I have come across several such examples to demonstrate how the same set of paintings may elicit different sets of responses depending on your background. Whether I'm not making such very flat and very black and white distinction. It is just for the sake of understanding I'm making this classification, rural children and urban children. But definitely, your background, your environment certainly conditions you to a certain extent. For instance, when I show these paintings, these beautiful paintings of birds, these animals, the children do come up with, not exactly they are able to identify, because often these birds are not, you cannot identify them anything very specifically. They are the imagination of the painter, yet the children usually would like to associate these birds with something that they know. So they begin to play a very interesting game between what they know and what they don't know, between the known and the unknown. So this kind of game is something that we need to encourage. We need to kind of provoke them to have more and more such games, such plays. It is very mental. It is definitely use a lot of imagination, but it also stems from what they have already seen and what they have not seen, what they have heard and what they haven't heard. We got some very interesting response to this particular painting, again painting of a bird by Tagore, where the children came up with various kinds of responses. Again, somebody was very convinced that this bird is something that definitely belongs to the Jurassic Park. It is not a bird per se, it is a pterodactyl, things like that. Somebody said it's an emaciated bird because you can see the skeleton inside the bird, a bird who has not eaten for days, so it's emaciated, it's a skeletal, etc. Then, that is why I have written here this caption, bird with a map. Then suddenly, one young boy stood up and said, I think it's a bird with a map. Look at the body of this bird, sir. And what is that with the body? Because you can see a map on the body. Because this boy, he was studying in class 8, so he knows how to locate things on the map. He knows atlas, so he can draw map himself. So he is using his experience of looking at map, being able to identify, being able to decipher map. He said it's a map, and why there should be a map on the body of a bird? Then he has a quick prompt explanation. He said because this bird is a traveling bird, a migratory bird. So he carries that map of his travel on his body all the time. It is something that we saw today in the museum, that Veronica cloth. So that cloth carries the impression of the Christ, whose face she wiped. So this bird also carries the map, the impression of map of all the places that it is traveling. You see, this is not my explanation. This is not Rabindranath's statement. It is coming from a boy of class 8. But how poetic, how enigmatic, how touching this explanation is. It is only when you allow them to speak, let them imagine. And let them not know that this is by Tagore or anybody very famous. So they come up with these explanations. Again, with this painting also, we got some very, very touching emotional response. This is a very simple painting compared to many other paintings by Tagore, in the sense that the subject is very, very clear, mother and child. So no ambiguity on that, no confusion on that. So everybody agreed, yes, it's mother and child, no issue, fine. So we kept on looking at this, everybody said, look at the mother, she's a doting, like she's so caring, and look at the child, this is a cute painting, there's a sense of warmth. So we kept on analyzing, quote unquote, the painting in our own ways. Then I suddenly realized maybe these kids are missing out on something. So I wanted to draw their attention to that black color around that figure, mother and child. So I asked them, have you noticed that black shape immediately next to that figure, around that figure? They said, yes, 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 we can see that. Any idea what could be that? So somebody said, it looks like they are sitting in front of their house, their hut. So that's the entrance. And that's the inside of the house, hence it's dark, fine. Somebody said, no, it doesn't look like a house, it doesn't look like a door. So, you see, it's very interesting that it's the same painting. The subject matter, with this, as far as the subject matter is concerned, everybody was very comfortable. Because it's very obvious, very simple, very direct, no confusion. But the moment I drew their attention to that black thing, they started some kind of, okay, let us think, a little bit of confusion. Then, a girl, slightly grown-up girl, she was studying in class 9. Yes, class 9 at that point of time. Then she came up with a very interesting explanation. She said, look, it is neither door, it is not part of an architecture, it is not sky, it is not background. Because somebody had just said before her, I think it's just a black background, nothing else. She said, it's not even a background. I said, then what is this? Then she came up with an amazing explanation. She said, okay, this black space around mother and child is a space that is protecting both the mother and child. It is this black is not black. It is a protection. It is then he actually told me that if possible in your imagination you remove that black, the mother and child might look very vulnerable. This blackness is a kind of visually protecting. Now, whether I am convinced with her explanation or not, that is beside the point. The fact that she was trying to interpret an abstract shape into some meaningful thing. And otherwise, we would have just simply missed out. We wouldn't have given a thought to that. Okay, it's just being all of us are like who draw and paint. We know sometimes we need to do just for certain kind of pictorial satisfaction. We need to have this black and red. But this girl was convinced that this blackness has a meaning. It is not abstract. It is not meaningless. And it has a very concrete meaning. This blackness is actually a form of protection, which is protecting, like the mother is protecting the child, So this blackness is protecting the mother and child both. So you get these very interesting responses. Again, when I showed this, there was a lot of commotion in the classroom. Somebody said, no, it looks like a water. Somebody, it looks like a fountain. Somebody said, no, it's a simple design. So everybody was coming up with extremely bizarre and strange ideas. Then there was this boy who came up with this very stunning explanation of this painting when he said that I think it is a story of a stone. It's a growth of the stone. And how do you know that? He said, now I have read somewhere that there is even a stone has a life. It grows, it gets reduced, it changes. And do you know that? Have you seen a stone growing? He said, no, I have read, I will not be able to see because it takes millions of years. You see, this little piece of geological information has somewhere subconsciously helped him to interpret this particular painting in a very meaningful and interesting way. So then, but we also had different, and other children had to say something else. No, it's not a story of stone. I think if you see, look at it this way, it looks like a man sitting. He said, okay, whatever it is, but he was so aggressive to make us believe that it has to be, he made us accept. So we take you, it's yours, this is your painting, it's fine. So sometimes you need to do that. Sometimes if somebody is really coming up with a stunning explanation, we need to accept that. Now with Rabindranath, he has not 5 or 10, but hundreds of landscape paintings, many. Now with some of them, particularly these paintings, where it is a particular moment of the day, more often than not, it is about dusk, and you see a twilight, you see a particular moment, and a very strange light. So when I show these landscapes to them, to the children, once again, you can see a clear kind of distinction in the way village kid responds and in the way a rural child responds. Usually, somebody with a city experience would say that, look, these landscapes are very mysterious landscapes, including this one, very menacing, very scary, very mysterious. But I can guarantee you, most of the rural children would say, no, we are fine with this landscape. There's nothing so mysterious about it. This is something that we encounter every day. So it's a familiarity with a certain kind of natural environment. It is the familiarity with the twilight that they see every day. It is the familiarity with the possibility of an animal sneaking out from the bush, which make them feel these are not mysterious landscapes. It's very common, something that we are associated with every day. So there's a clear distinction the way kids from different background would respond to. For instance, that somebody from a Calcutta school, a boy told me in one of those sessions that, look, this is a typically a setting for a wonderful thriller. For him, it's a setting for a thriller, maybe a thriller film or a thriller story. And of course, for a rural village, I mean, this is not a setting for a thriller. It's something very common, which they encounter every day of their life. And finally, we come at one of the most enigmatic and very engaging category of works by Tagore, that is portraits. Because Tagore himself had approached portraits, of course not realistically most of the times, of course not to make us kind of identify a particular person. For him, like the animals, like the birds, portrait is also a construction. So he was basically constructing portraits in his own way. And believe me, these children are able to respond to this method of construction very fast. Quickly they can see, okay, it is not a portrait that you do from looking at a particular person. It is a portrait, it's a face that you construct in your own, based on certain ideas, certain pictorial ideas. So in fact, when I was showing this particular work, this particular portrait to a group of children, then somebody came up with something very interesting, and I never looked at these portraits that way. Once again, I learned something from him. He said, look, it is a portrait which you can dismantle anytime and put them back again. And really? But exactly, look at it. In fact, let me put it very humbly, that I try to create an environment so that they do not have to regard me as a teacher. They can behave in a way that they are also teaching me. That is very important for me, to create that kind of emotional or psychological environment in a session where, okay, they know here is a person who has come with a whole pen drive of paintings or a whole bag of reproductions where there is no facility of a projector, fine. But that's it. Then the moment we begin the session, then they should not feel that I am a teacher. They should feel I am with them. So this boy, he started actually teaching me. He said, okay, look at the neck, look at the nose, look at the face. I have a similar game at home where I can construct the face, I can dismantle it. So I'm sure he was actually trying to convince me that I'm sure Rabindranath also thought in a similar way. Because you see in the next painting, I'm sure he kind of dismantled the face and put them back in a different order. Then again, I don't know what to say. Of course, later, just by chance, I came across a very small poem written by Tagore himself, because since he has written hundreds and thousands of poems, I don't think in one single life I'll be able to read all of them. It's just by chance, like, I chanced upon a very small poem where, in fact, Rabindranath is talking about how he feels that faces in real life can be dismantled and put them back because human beings keep changing their expressions, because human beings are pretentious, because human beings are hypocrites. So you can dismantle, you can put them. Okay, he has a different philosophy, but this young boy, he's looking at it as a visual construction, which can be dismantled and which can be put them back. Now, of course, this kind of portraits elicit or kind of, they create a very different kind of responses. Now, again, for most of the children, these portraits convey a sense of mystery. A person who is lost, a person who is not looking at anywhere specifically. Now, usually I have seen younger children do not have much to say about these paintings. They say, okay, fine. Nothing much that they can respond to. But with grown-up children, they get very intrigued. Children studying in class 9, let us say, class 10, that is 14 years old, 15 years old, 16 years old. Again, at this age, I have observed a very interesting kind of difference, let us say, in the way this kind of paintings are looked at or interpreted between the boys and the girls. Because we are talking about class 9, 10, 11, 12, boys and girls, where you can you can look at it from a gender perspective, you can look at it from various kinds of perspectives. So I'm not going into the theories, but let me share what I have found. Let me share what I have heard from them. Usually, the boys of that age group would say, okay, it looks like a mystery person. A mystery that needs to be unraveled. A mystery that needs to be probed. And the girls would usually say that no, this is a portrait of anybody who is deeply saddened. Somebody who is deeply sad. Somebody who is deeply depressed. So I have always seen that usually the boys of that age group would not respond to this sadness if there is any feeling of sadness around his face. They would say it's a mystery. That there is something very interesting happening, something mysterious happening to this person. Then the boys would usually get very perturbed with the fact, with the aspect that often you can't make out, is it a man or a woman? There are actually several such portraits by Tagore where the identity of the gender is not very clear on the face. No, so there would be some kind of argument. Somebody saying it's a man, somebody saying no, it's a woman. But then I've often found that the girls would say, does it matter? We are looking at expression. We are not looking at a particular gender. It doesn't matter whether it's a girl, whether it's a woman or a man. So you see, there's a very interesting kind of thing developing at that age group, and you would not know about these things unless you have shown these paintings to them. And then of course Rabindranath had come up with very funny portraits also, and these paintings, I have endless, maybe non-stop 10-12 hours of anecdotes. Some other time I can tell you. So how children came up with various stories, various interpretations with each, because then I had to do something, I had to really stop them and tell them, okay, you go back, you remember this word, and please write a small story based on this particular portrait or this figure. And they would come back with fantastic stories. Because I understood with these kind of images, just one line interpretation is not enough for the children. They need to write 2-3 pages of stories just to talk about this person, because they have so much to say. They have so much of stories about this man. So different kinds of portraits I have been showing, and you see, when you look at what children themselves do, for them it is not something very, very unusual. Particularly I'm talking about the younger children when you show these kind of faces, because they themselves also do various kinds of strange expressions. They build up various kinds of strange expressions when they do masks, when they do paintings. So they are quite familiar with these kind of expressions. For them it is not a big deal. But for the grown-up children, they tend to create some interpretations. They want to interpret them. They want to know, go deeper. So all these faces, each one of them individually, independently, for the children is a source of stream of stories. So part of my art appreciation project also would be to let the children express whatever they have felt, not only in terms of telling me verbally, vocally, but also to let them write. Particularly for the grown-up children, if you ask them, okay, you don't have to talk about the painting, but why don't you write about that man? Why don't you write about that person as if he's a real person whom you have met just now for 5 minutes? You go back and tell. Then sometimes I would provoke them, but of course you don't know who is he, you won't be able to write. They say, no, I know him. How do you know him? No, I know him. Tomorrow I'll show you. Like, I know his past, I know his present, I know his future. So they get a little challenged, and they usually come back next day with some fantastic stories. Finally, we are coming to the last and the final round of my presentation, where I would like to say a few things happening when I'm showing the self-portraits by Tagore. And we all know that Rabindranath has done not one or two, but many self-portraits. But none of them look like him. So it's very, very problematic for the children, because you see, when you show the self-portraits to slightly grown up, like children studying in class 7, 8, I'm talking about the Bengali children, and particularly children who are familiar with how Rabindranath really looked like in real life. If they didn't know, I would show them a photograph, because I want them to contrast. I want to feel the shock that this is the man, a very handsome, fair, a wonderful looking person. How and why he makes his own faces so quote unquote ugly, soiled, as if ink smeared on his face. Now, from the slightly younger children, I have found very rapid responses, very funny responses like, it's because Rabindranath never got time to actually see how he looked like. Then somebody told me, this happened with a village school, in a very interior, remote interior school near Shantiniketan. There was this tribal boy who told me, I know why it has happened like this. I said, tell me why. He said, because Rabindranath did not have a mirror at his home. Then I was told by his teacher, actually they don't have a mirror at home. Only his mother has got a very small mirror, which she doesn't allow her son to use because he might break. They're a very poor family. So one small mirror is very valuable. So he thought, it's possible that Rabindranath did not have a mirror. So he actually didn't know how he looked like. So these are the responses coming from the younger children. Then I again show them how he looked like. Then I would go back to these things. For the slightly grown-up children, again, I have found very stunning reactions and responses. For example, in one of those sessions, one boy from class 9, he told me that because there was already somebody from his class who made a very, he tried to be very smart, and he said, it's because Rabindranath was not good at self-portraits, that is why. Now this boy, he made a very strong objection. He said, no, that's not the case. He was a wonderful painter. You look at his other paintings. It's not that he lacked in skill. He deliberately did that. So I had to ask him why. Why Rabindranath had to deliberately kind of make himself look so ugly. Then this boy said, it's because basically this person was carrying a deep kind of sadness in him. And why? Then he said, I have read somewhere that he returned his award after that Jallianwala Bagh massacre. So this is a person who was very sharply and strongly reacting to violence. But at that point of time, we had this First World War, the Second World War was about to come, and all over the world, lot of violence, including India. So he was very sad, and it is that sadness that is coming through his face. And then, if that is what he wants to convey, obviously, for him it's very difficult to do his self-portrait in the way he really looked like in real life. This was his explanation. Then another girl, he said that not only that, I think it is also because Rabindranath, in spite of the fact that he was a very towering personality, very strong person, extremely intelligent, etc., but emotionally, remember this response is coming from a girl from class 10. She told me that emotionally he was a very vulnerable person. So his face is the manifestation of that vulnerability. Then I asked her, do you mean that he was a very weak person? He said, no, he was not a weak person. He was a very vulnerable. He's like, then she in fact used this term. She said, his mind was like a blotting paper. His mind could absorb everything that's happening emotionally. And hence, what you think it's a distortion is not a distortion. It is an expression. Then finally, I would show this particular work. And in fact, Rabindranath has a series of such 12 or 13 works like this, where, as you can see, this is the cover page of a news bulletin called Vishwabharati Bulletin, May 1934. You can see the date also. And on almost 12 or 13 cover pages, which had Rabindranath's photograph of his face, very nicely printed. And Rabindranath himself was kind of doing something over it, trying to distort, trying to smear some ink. I don't know why he would be doing this. This was my question. So when I was showing these works to the children, rather than asking them to respond in a certain way, I would go straight away and ask them why he would do this. again, you get a plethora of a huge range of very, very interesting answers. And one of those answers was, and there are several such interesting responses, one of them was like, he wanted to hide himself. Why? So this girl told me, it's because, you see, it's 1934, so already, he was very ashamed of, and was he ashamed of himself? But you know, he was ashamed not of himself, but he was ashamed of the fact that by that time, you see, because this girl was quite well informed about the freedom struggle of India. So she knew about the violences that took place around that time. So she came to this conclusion that Rabindranath was ashamed of his own country, that why there should be so much of violence, why there should be so much of bloodshed, why there should be so much of death. And he always felt, according to this girl, helpless. Though he was writing a lot, he was lecturing, he was touring, he actually was not able to do anything concretely. That was this girl's interpretation. So, according to her, Rabindranath was not distorting his face, not kind of damaging the look. Basically, he was hiding beneath his own self, because according to this girl, that usually our faces are like masks. But if you let the real self come out, so the face hides, it kind of tries to hide behind the real face. Then the face doesn't remain to be a mask, the mask turns to be a face, and the face becomes the real face. It ceases to be a mask anymore. So at that age group, you do find such complex responses, not exactly only visual reactions, but a little more theoretical, little more conceptual, based on certain informations. And then, finally, I also show this rare photograph, where you can see that Rabindranath is, in this particular photograph, of course, he is writing, but usually we have been told by people close to Rabindranath that when he painted, he wouldn't allow anybody to enter his studio except children. Because he said somewhere that when a child enters my room while I am painting, and when that child keeps interpreting whatever I was painting, I get an immense kind of whole range of ideas from that child. So they become part of my painting. I become a part of their mind. So this connection between Rabindranath as a painter and the child in him, inside him, is also very interesting. Now this is where I need to stop at the moment, because the anecdotes are endless, the stories are endless, there are many things to share, but maybe that is enough for one session. Given an opportunity, I would love to come back again and share more such experiences with you. Thank you so much.